Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a time when the streets were cobbled, the air was thick with wood smoke and livestock, and, believe it or not, people wore spoons on their hats. Yep. Spooning was a serious fashion statement. Imagine trudging through a muddy medieval village square, your cloak clinging with rain, and suddenly noticing that everyone from the nobleman to the local baker is balancing a bit of bent silverware on their headgear. Why? Well, you're about to find out, but fair warning, you probably won't survive this if you're the kind of person who gets annoyed when someone puts the forks in the knife drawer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to see who else is trying to sleep through the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're waking up in a cold straw-stuffed mattress in the early 1300s. The ceiling above is wooden, cracked, and smells faintly of mold. You're wearing some sort of itchy woolen tunic, and there's a lingering taste of boiled turnips on your tongue. You swing your feet off the bed, feeling the chill of dirt floor through your socks, one of which is already damp, of course, and you groggily reach for your hat. Not for warmth, but because you feel off without it. And not just any hat. Your hat has a spoon on it. That's right. You instinctively check to make sure the small pewter spoon is still secured to the band. Slightly tarnished, curved like a shallow smile. For some reason, it matters. Outside, the fog is thick, and the town is waking. Roosters crow, carts creak, and someone's already shouting about bread prices. You step out, adjusting your spoon hat slightly. A nearby neighbor nods solemnly, his spoon is larger, brass, and mounted upside down like some sort of culinary unicorn horn. Another man strolls past with two spoons, one on either side like antennae. You try not to stare. Clearly he's overcompensating for something. Spoons in this era are more than just tools for soup. Sure, the average medieval meal didn't involve a lot of cutlery, people mostly used fingers, chunks of bread, or maybe a knife if they were fancy, but spoons. Those had a special spot in the social ecosystem. They were small, portable, and surprisingly symbol-heavy. A finely crafted spoon could say a lot about a person. Kind of like today's wristwatch, only, you know, on your head. You wander to the market, where an old woman is selling pickled onions and dried eels. Her hat sports a delicately carved wooden spoon, sanded smooth and painted with tiny red roses. You raise an eyebrow. That's a lot of effort for something that usually just ends up in porridge. But in this world, spoons are currency, status, even superstition. One theory, still debated by scholars today, is that spoon hats originated among shepherds who needed a place to keep their eating tools safe, dry, and visible, so they wouldn't be stolen or lost in the grass. Over time, it evolved. By the late 13th century, it wasn't about practicality anymore, it was about presentation. Some hats had little loops to hold the spoons upright, others featured full-on spoon holsters stitched into the wool. The really stylish ones? Intricate spoon lacing. Yes. Spoon lacing. You pass a group of young boys kicking around a stuffed pig bladder. One of them has fashioned his spoon into a kind of rudimentary sundial. You're impressed. Also slightly confused. Do children even need timepieces when their only responsibility is, don't fall in a well? Down by the tavern, a cluster of drunkards are already deep into their ale. One begins a slurred debate about whether the king's knights will adopt triple spoon hats by next year. Someone else shouts that it's unholy and spoons should stay on the inside of clothing like in the old days. A minor scuffle breaks out. You wisely back away, but you file that little tidbit, apparently, spoon wearing wasn't always so external. According to the sleepy archivist who lives in the chapel loft, there's a theory, unsupported, but delightfully weird, that the spoon hat craze may have stemmed from a misinterpreted biblical passage. Something about lifting one's vessel heavenward. Scholars still argue whether this is nonsense or not, but hey, when the priest starts his sermon by asking everyone to raise their spoons to the sky, you start to wonder. Later that day, you find yourself at a communal table slurping a thin onion broth. Across from you, a young woman is adjusting the angle of the silver spoon mounted neatly to her felt bonnet. She catches you staring and grins. "For balance," she says. "And blessings." She taps it twice, like a ritual. She could be joking. But then again, she could also be the village alchemist's niece. You decide not to question it. That night, as you lay back down in the same hay-stuffed mattress, the wind howling through gaps in the shutters, you stare at your spoon hat resting nearby. It looks so ridiculous. Yet somehow, right. Like a strange kind of protection. A signal. A whisper from the past, or maybe the future. And just before you drift off, you wonder, if someone wears a fork on their hat, are they a rebel? Or just hungry? The next morning, your dreams still tangled with spoons and soup, you shuffle down a crooked alleyway lined with slanted houses and thatched roofs. The dew has soaked your hem, and the air smells like chimney soot and wet goat. As you make your way toward the town's gathering square, you begin to wonder, before people started poking spoons through hats, what were they wearing up there? Turns out, the story of headgear is a lot more tangled than your bed hair. Long before the spoon joined the hat party, people had been covering their heads for all sorts of reasons: status, faith, weather, and, in some cases, baldness-related drama. You spot a merchant in a floppy, oversized felt cap that looks like it's storing at least 3 spare loaves of bread. Another man's head is encased in something that resembles a velvet cupcake. Not even kidding. It wobbles slightly as he talks. Headwear in medieval Europe was a bit like today's phone cases, protective, practical, but also deeply personal and unnecessarily flamboyant. The average peasant might have worn a coif, think, a tight fabric beanie, while nobles favored things like chaperones, liripipes, and hennins. Yes, hennins, the tall, pointy cone hats that made every noblewoman look like a whimsical traffic cone. You pass a chapel where a statue of a saint wears a modest hooded cloak. The hood itself is simple, functional. But then your eye is drawn to the stone hat. Yes, even this 12th century statue has an early spoon-shaped indentation on the brim. Coincidence? Possibly. But the seed of spoondom might have been planted here. Historians still argue whether the spoon-on-head fashion was inspired by religious garb, occupational symbols, or just sheer boredom. Some say cooks began the trend as a practical habit. Others claim it was a monk's joke that got wildly out of hand. Either way, the connection between hats and identity was firmly in place by the early Middle Ages. Back in the bustling square, a group of town criers are gossiping. One sports a feathered bicorn. Another wears a twisted woolen wrap crowned with, wait for it, a tiny carved duck. No spoon in sight, but clearly, people have been using their heads to tell stories for generations. You duck into a tailor's shop for warmth. The walls are cluttered with cloth bolts, spindles of thread, and drawings of hat prototypes. One sketch catches your eye. It's a floppy cap with a loop stitched into the crown, clearly designed to hold a spoon. The tailor notices your interest and snorts. That was a commission for Sir Palfrow. Said he wanted to be fed by faith. I think he just liked attention. She shrugs. Didn't even pay. That loop, though, it sparks something. You realize there was a moment, a turning point, when the hat wasn't just a hat anymore. It became a stage. And the spoon? The star. Outside again, a passing blacksmith nods to you, the handle of a hefty iron spoon poking out of his leather cap like an accidental antenna. His hat is scorched, speckled with soot, and shaped like a helmet made from despair and ambition. You ask him if the spoon has a function. He grins. Keeps me balanced. You're not sure if he means spiritually, emotionally, or physically. But you nod anyway. Later, in the town archive, a musty building that smells like parchment and disappointment, you find a tattered manuscript describing the hat laws of a nearby duchy. Apparently, nobles were once forbidden to wear hats taller than 3 hands high unless they bore a family crest or a ceremonial spoon. It's right there in the law. Clear as dried ink. So, even before spoons were common headgear, hats themselves were heavily coded. You could read a man's profession, birthplace, or marital status just by the shape of his hat. And once spoons entered the chat, things only got weirder. You find an illustration in the margins of an old prayer book, a monk kneeling in front of an altar, his hood pulled back to reveal a flat-topped hat with a spoon stuck right through the top like a satellite dish. Whether it was a real tradition or just a bored scribe's doodle, no one's certain. But it's compelling. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, you sit on a barrel outside the tavern and reflect. Before there were spoon hats, there were just hats. Silent declarations of identity. A peasant's bonnet said, "I work hard." A bishop's mitre shouted, "God likes me best." A jester's cap with bells screamed, "Please don't throw rocks at me." And maybe, just maybe, the spoon was the next logical step, a way to say something new. Something in between sacred and absurd. A little wink from the wearer to the world. You scratch your head under your own modest hat. No spoon today. You left it at home, unsure if this was a spoon-worthy occasion. But tomorrow? Who knows? One thing's for certain, in a world where hats have always been more than just hats, the spoon was just waiting for its moment in the spotlight. By the time the town rooster decides to scream again, you're already awake. Blame the itchy blanket or the fact that your neighbor snores like a dying church organ. Either way, you're up, and today, you're heading to the Guild Quarter. Why? Because if you want to understand how spoon-on-hat fashion really took hold, you need to meet the people who made the hats, and the spoons. The Guild Quarter is a thumping maze of clinking tools, half-shouted barters, and apprentices running around with smudged faces and the haunted look of someone who's just spilled hot pitch on a master's tunic. And right at the corner of Cobbler's Lane and Spoonmaker's Row, yes, that's actually what the crooked wooden sign says, you find the humble company of crafted spoons, ladles, and holy utensils. A proper guild with an improperly long name. The moment you walk inside, you're hit by a wave of metal, polish, and pride. Long tables are covered with spoons in all states of creation, some plain, some engraved, some shaped like birds, suns, or saints holding soup bowls. And, of course, several are being bent, molded, and riveted onto strips of fabric clearly meant for headgear. One of the journeymen notices your confusion. First time, he grunts, holding up a spoon with tiny lion paws etched into the handle. People think we just make cutlery. But nah. We're artists. Philosophers. Engineers of edible elegance. You blink. He leans closer. And now, fashion designers. See, the Spoonmakers Guild didn't just ride the spoon hat wave, they built it. The guild records, which you peek at while the master dozes in a chair, show an intentional pivot sometime in the mid-14th century. Spoon production shifted. Less focus on table use, more on display. Handles got longer. Bowls got wider. Engraving styles started mimicking heraldry. One entry simply reads, "Commission for Lady Frond, 2 spoons for bonnet crest, each to resemble a tulip and not be confused with vegetable scoops." At some point, someone must have decided, what if we wore the spoons? And then someone else probably muttered, what if we charged extra for it? Now, the guild even offers a hat alignment service. You sit in a chair while an apprentice sizes your head and recommends the optimal spoon angle for maximum spiritual reception in crowd envy. It's all very serious. Outside again, you follow your ears toward a rhythmic thudding sound. Across the square, in the shadow of the tanner's shed, the Hatters Guild is hosting a public exhibition. Rows of tables are covered in brimmed wonders, fur-crowned creations, and more than a few velvet monstrosities. And yes, almost every single hat has some sort of spoon slot, pocket, or display hook. One is literally a tiny rotating spoon carousel, powered by a dangling counterweight. You overhear two apprentices bickering. Silver bends too easy. Yeah, but it reflects the sin out of your eyes. A master hatter waddles over and taps you on the shoulder. Need something custom? We've got 3 spoon bonnets and full ceremonial ladle helms. Or we can patch one to your existing cap. What are you, merchant class? Shepherd? Apothecary? You admit you're just observing. He shrugs. Suit yourself. But everyone's wearing something on their head these days. Even monks. You don't want to be mistaken for a tax collector. That's motivation enough. As you wander, you start to pick up on the social patterns. Small, plain spoons tend to be worn by the working class. Often positioned to the left, like a humble salute. The nobility, of course, go bigger, shinier, and higher. Some even stack multiple spoons like head feathers, creating dizzying towers of utensil vanity. You spot a noblewoman riding past in a litter, her hat boasting a single golden spoon suspended on a wire so it floats above her scalp like a halo made by a kitchen god. A fishmonger down the street wears a spoon bent into the shape of a cod. A midwife sports one engraved with moons and stars. You're beginning to see, this isn't just fashion, it's biography. People wear their spoons like wearable scrolls. Back in the guild hall, an elder artisan shows you a curious item, a spoon-shaped badge worn by a king's advisor in the early 1400s. Proof, she says, that spoons weren't just for commoners. Even courtly types had them. Maybe even started it. Who knows? Historians still argue whether the practice began from below, as a folk habit among shepherds and travelers, or was first adopted in noble courts, where eccentric trends often filter downward. The only agreement? Nobody meant for it to last this long. By now your head is buzzing with detail, and you realize just how much of your identity, back then, and even now, is tied to the little decisions people make about how they present themselves. And somehow, this ridiculous spoon hat trend makes sense. You don't buy one today. But the guild's folk give you a parting gift, a bent, polished tin spoon with a red silk ribbon attached. First one's free, the artisan winks. But next time you'll want a matching set. You laugh, but you suspect she's right. You don't wear the spoon the next day. Not yet. It sits in your pouch, warm from the sun and faintly rattling as you walk. You feel it there, a constant presence, like a guilty thought or an untied shoelace. But this morning, your mind isn't on fashion. It's on function. Because the spoon-on-hat phenomenon, as ridiculous as it sounds, didn't start out purely as a style statement. You trudge up a gentle hill toward a sheep pasture just outside the town walls. The air smells like damp grass and overly confident goats. Here, among the grazing livestock and half-built fences, you find one of the earliest communities where spoons on heads weren't decorative at all, they were practical. A hunched shepherd waves at you from a stump, his broad felt hat bristling with tiny wooden spoons like some kind of culinary crown. "Rain's comin'," he mutters, squinting at the sky. Then he flicks his head to adjust one of the spoons into the shade, where it catches a droplet of dew and channels it down to his mouth. "See?" he says, grinning. "Hydration." You blink. You drink off your hat. He nods proudly. Best invention since fire. And just like that, you realize how absurdly clever this all is. In rugged, rural regions, where carrying a backpack full of tools wasn't always practical, hats became storage, shelter, and sometimes, snack station. Wooden or tin spoons stitched into the brim could be used to scoop water from streams, dig up tubers, or, more commonly, taste test soups while keeping your hands free. There's even talk of one shepherd who used his hat spoon to fling pebbles at wolves, though historians still argue whether that was self-defense or just extreme boredom. The hat wasn't just something to keep the sun off your nose. It was a wearable toolbox. And in this context, spoons weren't decoration, they were survival. Later that afternoon, you stumble upon a traveling tinker and his donkey cart full of strange inventions. One is a wide-brimmed straw hat with a copper ladle mounted on a hinge. You pull it down, it swings in front of your face like a medieval periscope. Wind-resistant, he claims, and doubles as a bird feeder. You try not to laugh, but the pigeon already perched on the rim disagrees. Back in the village, an old woodcut illustration in the tavern's guest book shows a baker pulling buns from the oven with a long-handled spoon, while a second, smaller spoon juts proudly from the side of her bonnet. Is it a backup? A measuring device? Or just a badge of culinary honor? No one knows. The barkeep shrugs and pours you something vaguely wine-adjacent. That night, in the comfort of candlelight, you flip through a borrowed ledger from the town's archive. One passage catches your eye: field hats of the Westlands often included sewn-in utensils. Wearers report fewer thefts and increased convenience when foraging, though local clergy decry it as vanity by handle. This is the part where function and symbolism start to blend. Some wearers claimed their hat spoons were blessed, anointed during solstice feasts or dipped into sacred wells. Others swore the spoon's placement could affect their luck. Spoon over the left eye. Protection from betrayal. Spoon over the right. Prosperity. Spoon dead center. All-seeing stomach, as one very drunk farmer explained to you before falling off his stool. It becomes clear that spoons weren't just tools. They were charms. Tiny wearable prayers to the gods of harvest, weather, and slightly oversalted stew. You remember what the guild master said yesterday: people wear their spoons like scrolls. Now, you understand it on a deeper level. In the countryside, where superstition and survival hold equal weight, the spoon was part amulet, part multi-tool, part humble brag. And then, like a crumb trailing into your mind, you recall the tale of the spoon sentinel. It's one of those bedtime legends whispered by old folks who enjoy terrifying children. A solitary woodsman who wore 7 spoons on his hat, each carved from a different tree. Willow, ash, yew, rowan, holly, birch, and apple. They say he could sense danger, cure colic, and stir stew at the same time. Of course, historians still argue whether this man ever existed, or if he was just invented to explain weird hat choices at festivals. But the legend stuck. Just like the spoons. As the stars emerge and the night winds hum through the thatch, you finally take out your gifted spoon. It glints softly, the ribbon fluttering in the breeze like it's testing the air for permission. You run your fingers over the handle. It's not big. Not fancy. But suddenly, it feels like it could mean something. Not fashion. Not status. Just you. So you tie it to the side of your cap. Not too obvious. But visible. It dangles as you walk home. The wind catches it. It taps softly against your temple. And for the first time in days, you feel like you belong. The next morning, no one says anything about your spoon. Not the baker with the soot-smeared apron. Not the old woman who sells eggs and opinions by the well. Not even the blacksmith, whose entire life seems like one long eyebrow raise. But they see it. That much you know. You catch a few glances. A half smile. A shared look between 2 kids before one mimics the spoon bobbing from your hat with exaggerated wobble. You're in. And just in time. Because today is the festival of St. Galfred the Humble, a name you suspect was invented solely so people could get drunk in public while wearing weird things on their heads. The town square is already humming with activity by mid-morning. Flags drape from every beam. Vendors hawk everything from pickled pears to spiced mead. Musicians tune lutes with exaggerated importance. And all around, people are showing off their spoons. You've never seen such variety. One man wears a tall cap covered in dozens of tiny spoons, each jingling softly as he moves, like a wearable wind chime with high self-esteem. A woman strolls past with a wide-brimmed hat bearing a single, perfectly polished spoon, balanced so delicately on the edge it seems to defy gravity. A group of children runs by wearing hats made entirely from old soup ladles tied together with string. It's part parade, part culinary nightmare. A loud voice bellows from the stage, "Come one, come all. Present your hat for judgment in the spoonery spectacle." Prizes for elegance, function, and historical accuracy. Historical accuracy. Now you're listening. You sidle up to a tent labeled Spoon Lore and Artifacts, curated by Brother Mavrin. Inside, a monk in patched robes adjusts a monocle the size of a toast biscuit. "Ah," he says, peering at your modest headgear. "Early peasant style. Modest. Symbolic of usefulness over vanity. Rare these days." He waves you in. The tent is a wonderland. Spoons behind glass. Hats behind velvet ropes. Diagrams showing spoon placement across regions. One chart, labeled the Spiral of Significance, maps out exactly how the direction a spoon faces correlates with personality traits. North-facing. You're pragmatic. South. Mysterious. West. Probably allergic to leeks. Brother Mavrin gestures to a parchment scroll. This here's a copy of the Royal Spoon Decree of 1384. Issued by Queen Linwith herself. She claimed spoons must never point downward, for it invites bad harvest. He sighs. Historians still argue whether she meant that literally or was just bitter about soup. You nod solemnly, as though you haven't just broken that rule 5 minutes ago while adjusting your hat strap. Further along, there's a cracked portrait of a noble family, all 6 members wearing varying spoon hats. One child even has a miniature pewter spoon tied to their cradle cap. "That's Lady Vinra's brood," the monk explains. She was obsessed with spoon symbolism. Believed each child's destiny was shaped by the material of their hat spoon. You lean in. Gold. Iron. Bone. Glass. And, oh, one carved from bread. You're not sure whether to admire the ingenuity or worry for the ants. As you leave the tent, you're greeted by a stranger holding a tray of what looks like egg custards. "Try the spoon tart," he chirps. Named after the hats. Tastes like pride and mild regret. You take a bite. It tastes like lemon and something vaguely burnt. So, yes. Accurate. Near the fountain, you spot a stage where the more experimental hat designs are being displayed. One woman's hat features a mobile of rotating teaspoons powered by wind. Another fellow wears a helmet with retractable soup spoons that slide out like a knight's visor. A loud murmur rolls through the crowd as a masked man arrives with a silver spoon shaped like a dragon's tongue coiling around his feathered cap. He bows. The wind catches the spoon. The crowd gasps. You look down at your own hat. Modest. Homemade. Slightly crooked. You've never been prouder. Later that evening, as twilight paints the rooftops in syrupy hues, the townsfolk gather for the spoon oath. It's more theater than anything. Everyone holds up their hats and recites a pledge to honor the utensil and protect the dignity of domes. A few giggle. One man drops his hat and panics as it rolls into the fire pit. Dramatic rescue ensues. And then, quiet. A lull. A boy, no older than 10, steps forward. He wears a cap stitched by unsure hands, and a spoon bent slightly the wrong way. But he holds it high and says, "I like mine because it's mine." Silence. Then applause. It's corny, yes. But in that moment, you realize this festival isn't just about fashion. Or function. Or even history. It's about belonging. People used to wear spoons because they had to. Then because it was clever. Then because it was cool. And now, because it connects them to each other. Somewhere in the crowd, you hear someone whisper, "You see that one? The one with the red ribbon spoon. That's a guild piece." You smile, just a little. It's not just a spoon anymore. It's a story. You wake late the next morning, the echo of fiddles and clinking cups still drifting behind your eyelids. The festival's over, but its aftertaste lingers in the town, half-finished decorations, ribbons on lampposts, someone's hat still dangling from a tree branch. Your spoon hat rests beside your bed, slightly smudged with roasted chestnut grease and mystery glitter. You don't ask questions. Today, you've decided to go deeper. Beyond the fairs and rural customs. Past the humble shepherds and festival goers. You're heading to the archives. The Archivum Collegium is less of a building and more of a chilly stone barn where scrolls go to nap forever. It smells of mold, beeswax, and the type of ink that probably poisons you slowly over time. The archivist is a skeletal man named Adric who doesn't look like he's slept since the last lunar eclipse. He stares at your hat spoon for an uncomfortable few seconds, then mutters, "Top shelf, right corner," under the texts marked, "Vain or Practical." You find a dusty folio labeled "A Treatise on Symbolic Headgear, Spoon Variants Through the Ages." Promising. The first few pages are dry, literally. One crumbles when you turn it. But soon you stumble onto something intriguing, illustrations of noble courts where spoons weren't just tools or tokens of luck, but status weapons. In one portrait, a baron's wife wears a towering headdress bristling with gold-plated dessert spoons. Countess of Claverny, the caption reads, favored 6-layer construction to signify her family's 6 royal bloodlines. You count them. 1 layer per dynasty. One overcompensating noblewoman. Another page shows court jesters with spoons shaped like animal heads, fox, bear, goose, all symbolizing their chosen comedic style. One jester apparently earned the nickname, Sir Stir-a-Lot, and yes, you are absolutely stealing that for your next tavern quiz team. And then, tucked between a badly inked lineage chart and an annotation that just says, "This man had no taste," you spot the story of the duel of the 2 spoons. Picture this, France, 1421. 2 knights argue over inheritance. Not land. Not gold. But who gets their late uncle's ceremonial soup spoon, carved from narwhal tusk? They choose not swords, but spoons at dawn. Metal ladles. Honor on the line. They bash each other for a full 7 minutes before one yields due to cramping. Historians still argue whether it was an official duel or a poorly timed kitchen accident. But either way, the winner mounted the spoon on his helm and wore it to the royal banquet. You try to imagine someone today settling a family feud that way. I challenge you to a noodle-off, Aunt Karen. Scrolling deeper into the records, a pattern begins to emerge. During certain decades, spoon hats gain traction rapidly, especially in times of uncertainty. Periods of famine. Everyone's suddenly wearing ladles like protective charms. Political upheaval. Boom, decorative teaspoons engraved with slogans. The spoon becomes a stand-in for voice, hope, even rebellion. One parchment from the 1300s tells of the Spoonists, an underground society of commoners who wore spoon-shaped pins as a protest against rising bread taxes. They'd hold silent ladle marches, walking through the streets with large wooden serving spoons tucked into their belts and hats. Their motto, "To feed is to fight." It's catchy. A little dramatic. But undeniably stirring. Pun intended. You press your fingers against the page. Could a kitchen utensil really be so versatile? You think of modern equivalents, bumper stickers, enamel pins, ironic t-shirts. Maybe we haven't changed that much. Adric the archivist slides past you, muttering, "Spoons again. Always spoons." You ask him how long people have been researching this. He sighs. Since before people had forks. We're a deeply weird species. At the far end of the archive, you find a diagram showing the spoon class pyramid. At the base, plain wooden spoons for fieldworkers. Above that, tin and iron for merchants. Then brass, pewter, silver, and finally gold with jeweled inlays. And at the very top, the phantom spoon, a rumored invisible spoon hat worn only by royals in secret ceremonies. Naturally, historians still argue whether it ever existed or if it was just invented to justify losing spoons at coronations. The deeper you go, the more surreal it becomes. You read of a duchess who had her entire will encoded on a set of ceremonial measuring spoons. Another tale tells of a monastery where monks used spoon hats to denote rank. The larger the spoon, the more soup privileges at dinner. One poor novice apparently wore a thimble for 6 years before finally earning a teaspoon. And then, an unexpected twist. A single letter, written in faded script by someone known only as M. It reads: "We do not wear the spoon because it is useful. We wear it because the world is absurd, and the spoon reminds us we are too. Let us cling to silver nonsense, for in that nonsense we find truth." You pause. The spoon isn't about cooking, or fashion, or even symbolism. Not really. It's a quiet rebellion. A joke worn proudly on your brow. A reminder that life is often ridiculous, and the best way to survive it is with a little absurdity balanced just above your forehead. You tuck the letter into your journal and leave the archive, brain buzzing like a kettle at full boil. Outside, the air smells like fresh bread and new rain. Children race past wearing mismatched spoon caps, laughing like they've never heard of rent or dental bills. You catch your reflection in a puddle. Your spoon glints just slightly. You look like someone who knows something. Maybe not what, but something. By the time you return to the village square, the energy from the festival has shifted. The banners are limp in the wind. Confetti nests in gutters. Even the ribbon-bedecked donkey, Sir Prancelet, self-appointed mayor of yesterday's spoon parade, is back to pulling a cart of turnips with the resigned sigh of a has-been. But something has taken root in you now. That letter, that quiet phrase, silver nonsense. You can't stop thinking about it. So you decide to ask around. Your first stop is the weaver's shop, where Dame Elsbeth is expertly yelling at a spindle. She pauses only briefly when you enter. Spoon questions, she grunts without looking up. You nod. She gestures to a stool. "I wore one once," she says, dragging yarn through her fingers. "During the great cold. We believed it drew warmth to the head. Mine was iron. Gave me headaches. Did it work?" She squints at you. "I had 3 children that winter." You decide. As you leave, she adds, "It wasn't about the cold. It was about not giving up." That's the thing, isn't it? These spoons on hats, half joke, half symbol, somehow carry stories people don't quite know how to tell out loud. Love. Hope. Grit. Misery. But always with a wink. Next, you visit the potter, Master Wibbin, whose shop smells like fire and stubbornness. He tells you of his father, who wore a spoon made of cracked porcelain. "A joke," he says. "Too fragile for soup." But it was the only thing he'd made that survived the fire. He shrugs. Sometimes what's broken tells the best story. You try not to look too moved. At the tavern, the innkeeper tells you a different story. One that leans into legend. "There's a tale," she begins, sliding you a cup of herbal nonsense that may or may not be tea, of a town where no one wore hats at all. Clean heads, neat partings, all very respectable. But they lost something. Creativity, maybe. Or imagination. One day, a stranger rode in with a spoon stitched to his hood. The children laughed. The mayor scowled. But by week's end, every baker, stable boy, and schoolteacher wore a spoon of some kind. No one knows why. Just that it felt better. You ask if the stranger was a trickster god or just really committed to soup. She smiles. Does it matter? Later, sitting on a bench by the dried-up fountain, you catch sight of old Gilrick, the bell ringer. His hat features not one, but 3 spoons, one brass, one wooden, and one carved from something translucent and fishy-smelling. You point, curious. Different wives, he mutters. You consider not asking follow-up questions. But then he adds, they're not about love. They're about survival. One made me porridge. One mended my coat. One taught me how to whistle through my teeth. He taps his hat. This way, I remember them all. Even when I forget everything else. You swallow the lump in your throat. It's starting to dawn on you that these spoons, ridiculous as they look, serve as emotional landmarks. Tiny monuments to something felt. Lived. Lost. It's less about what they are and more about what they anchor. And sometimes, what they challenge. You head to the river, where the tanner's apprentice is skipping stones. Her spoon is bent sideways, a long thin piece of pewter that's been stamped with tiny initials. She shrugs when you ask. Belonged to my brother. Said if I wore it, I'd never forget to be annoying like him. She flicks a stone. Turns out he was right. The laughter that follows is honest and sharp. It drifts out over the water, lands somewhere in the reeds. You let it settle. Back in the village square, a girl is painting her own spoon hat, tongue poking out in focus. Her design is wild, swirls, stars, a tiny duck. You ask what it means. She looks up. It means. I made it. You nod. You understand. Across the cobblestones, a grizzled farmer with an onion in one hand and a spoon on his head that's literally been nailed to a beetroot calls out, "Why wear a spoon? Why not a fork?" Good question. But you know now. Forks stab. Spoons hold. It's late when you return home. The stars blink sleepily above, and your breath fogs in the air like old ghost stories. You unlace your boots. Set your spoon hat on the sill, where moonlight catches its curve. You sit there a while, just watching it. And it hits you that spoons on hats are more than weird fashion. More than protest. More than memory. They're a quiet sort of resilience. A way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still me. Even if the world's ridiculous, I won't let it forget my shape. The shape of someone who stirs. Who scoops? Who holds without cutting? Someone absurd, yes. But still standing. Still stirring. The next morning, you wake with a slight crick in your neck, probably from sleeping next to your spoon hat on the windowsill. The sun spills softly through the curtain, painting the room golden. You decide it's time for a walk, not the bustling village, but the wild edges where the trees lean in close and secrets whisper on the wind. The path is muddy, the scent of damp earth rich and familiar. Your boots squelch rhythmically. You pass a cluster of wildflowers, their petals nodding as if to greet you. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and imagine yourself a medieval wanderer, part detective, part daydreamer, on a quest for spoon wisdom. Not far from the village, you find the ancient stone circle. Weathered and moss-covered, the stones stand like tired sentinels guarding a riddle no one dares solve. Legends say the Druids once gathered here to celebrate the changing seasons and maybe, just maybe, to commune with kitchen utensils imbued with magic. Historians still argue whether the circle was ever used for spiritual rites or just bad town planning. You sit on one of the stones, your spoon hat resting beside you, and listen. The wind hums a soft tune through the branches. Somewhere, a blackbird trills a melancholy song. You breathe in the scent of pine and damp leaves, feeling strangely grounded despite the mysterious air. A sudden movement catches your eye, a small group of villagers gathering by the circle's edge. They're setting up tables laden with odd trinkets, spoons painted bright blue, ladles adorned with feathers, even a few spoons with tiny bells tied to their handles. It looks like a spontaneous fair, or a secret meeting. You approach cautiously, and a cheerful woman with a spoon-shaped pendant smiles warmly. "Ah, you're here for the spoonlight gathering," she says, her voice bubbling like a spring. "Every year, when the moon is just right, we celebrate the humble spoon and all its magic." You raise an eyebrow. Magic? She nods seriously. Not the flashy kind. The kind that stirs the soul. The gathering begins with stories, tales passed down through generations about spoons that healed broken hearts, spoons that guided lost travelers, spoons that whispered forgotten secrets. One elder recounts a tale of a spoon that changed color depending on the mood of its owner. Another claims a spoon once saved a child from drowning by shining a light only the child could see. You can't help but chuckle softly. The idea of a mood-reading spoon sounds like something straight out of a medieval fantasy novel. But then again, in a world without smartphones or memes, what better way to track feelings than with a magical spoon? There's music too, a soft melody played on a lute and a recorder. The tune is hypnotic, a gentle lullaby that makes you want to close your eyes and drift away. People sway, their spoon hats bobbing like strange flowers in a breeze. The air is filled with laughter and the smell of sweet mead. At one point, a young boy runs up to you, holding a spoon carved with intricate patterns. "This is my lucky spoon," he says proudly. "My grandmother gave it to me. She says it brings courage." You smile, feeling the weight of tradition and hope bundled into that small piece of wood. As the evening deepens, lanterns are lit, casting flickering shadows that dance across the stones. The spoonlight gathering feels like a secret rebellion against the mundanity of life, a reminder that even the simplest things can hold profound meaning. You catch yourself tapping your own spoon hat gently, wondering if it too carries a kind of magic you've only just begun to understand. Historians still argue whether such gatherings were widespread or rare, isolated pockets of eccentricity in a rigid society. But tonight, under the watchful eyes of ancient stones and new friends, you decide it doesn't really matter. Magic is what you make of it. And right now, it's stirring warmly inside you. As dawn creeps over the horizon, you find yourself walking home through fields glazed with dew. The air is cool and crisp, carrying the scent of earth and something faintly sweet, perhaps wild thyme or just morning itself. Your feet sink softly into the mossy ground, and the spoon hat on your head feels heavier, like it's packed with stories, memories, and maybe a pinch of enchantment. On your way, you pass the blacksmith's forge, where old Tom is already hammering at a glowing piece of metal. Sparks fly like tiny stars against the morning gloom. He looks up, wiping sweat from his brow. "That spoon hat still on your head?" he asks, grinning. You nod. He chuckles. "You know, spoons aren't just for eating or showing off. Back in the day, some blacksmiths made spoon tips sharp enough to cut cloth or scrape armor. Not exactly dinnerware, but practical in a pinch." You raise an eyebrow. "Spoon swords? Really?" He shrugs. Historians still argue whether any actual battles were fought wielding spoons, or if it's just tavern talk. You can almost hear the clinking of spoons as weapons in a smoky bar somewhere. Further along, you spot the village baker kneading dough with vigorous determination. She wears a spoon hat crafted from polished oak, each spoon bent carefully to form petals like a flower. "Morning," she says, tossing you a warm roll. "Spoons remind me to rise, like the dough. Slow but sure." You bite into the roll, buttery and warm, and suddenly the spoon hat feels less like a strange accessory and more like a talisman. Something that carries patience, hope, and the slow art of making things last. By noon, you reach the edge of the forest, where the light filters through branches in golden shafts. You pause to rest, leaning against a mossy trunk. A soft rustle nearby reveals a fox, its coat gleaming like molten copper. It watches you with curious eyes before disappearing into the undergrowth. You think about how animals use natural tools, beaks, claws, teeth, and humans, for all their cleverness, often settle for spoons. Maybe it's not the sharpness but the gentleness that counts. The way spoons cradle, carry, and nourish. Nearby, a group of children play a game with spoons balanced on their noses. The laughter is pure and infectious. One kid loses balance, sending a spoon clattering to the ground. He shrugs and says, "Better luck next time." You smile, thinking about how even in play, spoons teach patience and grace. Later, you visit the village healer, an elderly woman who wears a simple linen dress and a hat with a single, gleaming silver spoon. Her hands smell faintly of herbs and earth. She tells you about medicinal spoons, used to measure potions, herbs, and mysterious elixirs. A well-measured spoon, she says softly, can mean the difference between healing and harm. Historians still argue whether medieval healers relied more on faith or science, but you find comfort in the healer's quiet confidence. As the sun dips low, you make your way back to your small cottage, your spoon hat casting a long shadow on the cobblestones. You realize the spoon's strange journey, from table to hat, from tool to symbol, is really a story about humans themselves. About how we take simple things and turn them into stories, meaning, and sometimes magic. How we carry the past, present, and future, all balanced delicately on our heads. You place your spoon hat on the table, running your fingers over its curves. You're part of this strange, spoon-filled history now. And maybe, just maybe, it's not so boring after all. The days turn soft, and the village settles into a gentle rhythm. You find yourself drawn again to the market, where the mundane hums beneath the colorful chaos. Stalls burst with woven cloth, fragrant herbs, and baskets spilling with apples that glisten like rubies. But amidst the bustle, spoons remain an unexpected motif, scattered across hats, hanging from belts, even tied in braids. You pause at the apothecary's booth, where a wizened man polishes a collection of spoons made from bone, horn, and occasionally gold. Spoons, he declares with a twinkle, are the original measuring devices. Before rulers and scales, there was the spoonful. A sacred measure, if you will. He leans closer. Historians still argue whether certain spoons were used exclusively for food or for secret alchemical mixtures. He points to a particularly curious spoon, its bowl etched with strange symbols. This one, they say, was designed to catch moonlight. To stir potions only at midnight, under the new moon. You half believe it, half smile, imagining a sorcerer's midnight snack. Further along, you encounter a group of weavers discussing the latest fashion trends. One boasts of a hat adorned with spoons that clink musically when she moves. Another mocks the trend as silver nonsense, but secretly sports a small spoon pinned inside her cloak. It seems everyone wants to join in, even if only a little. The conversation drifts to social status. Spoons weren't just utensils, they were statements. A finely crafted spoon on your hat could signal wealth, education, or even rebellion. Some wore spoons as badges of defiance against strict sumptuary laws that dictated who could wear what. Others simply liked the way spoons caught the light, sparkling like tiny mirrors. You overhear a heated debate among scholars at the town hall. Some insist spoon hats were purely practical, meant to keep flies off faces during long summer days. Others argue the spoons served as a secret code, a way to identify members of underground guilds or religious sections. Historians still argue whether these theories hold water or are just the fancy of over-imaginative minds. You chuckle, picturing a medieval version of a spy thriller starring spoon-clad agents exchanging coded soup recipes. That evening, you sit by the fire, spoon hat resting nearby, and think about how these odd customs, wearing spoons on hats, reflect the broader human desire to connect, communicate, and sometimes just to stand out. In a time when words were precious and few could read or write, symbols like spoons became a language of their own. You wonder what modern-day spoon hats we wear, those little quirks and badges that say, "This is me." Maybe it's a favorite hoodie, a quirky phone case, or a tattoo hidden beneath sleeves. The spoon hat isn't just medieval nonsense. It's a reminder that fashion, identity, and meaning are deeply intertwined. That even the smallest things can carry stories, stir emotions, and spark quiet revolutions. And as you drift to sleep, you smile, knowing you've joined a centuries-old club, a club where spoons, laughter, and strange hats reign supreme. The following morning, you wake to the smell of fresh rain and the soft chirping of sparrows outside your window. Your spoon hat sits quietly on the dresser, its spoons still gleaming despite the damp air. Feeling a spark of curiosity, you decide to visit the village library, a cozy stone building with shelves packed full of dusty tomes and faded manuscripts. Inside, the librarian, a bespectacled woman with a kindly smile, leads you to a section dedicated to medieval customs and fashions. She pulls out a large, leather-bound volume that creaks as it opens, revealing illustrations of hats adorned with all sorts of kitchen implements, spoons, forks, even tiny pots. You lean in, fascinated. One page depicts a noblewoman wearing a towering hat crowded with silver spoons, balanced carefully like a small forest of shiny trees. Another shows a jester whose cap jingles with miniature spoons tied to strings. The artwork is vivid, even whimsical, suggesting that spoon hats were as much about humor and performance as about style. Historians still argue whether spoon hats were widespread or mostly a regional oddity, but the evidence points to a rich tradition of playful experimentation with headwear during the medieval period. People loved to express themselves through their hats, sometimes serious, sometimes downright silly. You trace your finger along a note in the margin, written in spidery script. In times of famine, spoons were treasured not just as utensils but as symbols of hope and survival. This transforms your perspective. Those humble spoons on hats might have carried more than just fashion statements. They were reminders of the daily struggle, the importance of sharing, and the simple joy of a meal. As you pore over the manuscripts, you find references to spoon festivals, gatherings where people competed to craft the most elaborate spoon hats. The festival sounds like a noisy, joyful affair, full of music, dancing, and friendly rivalries. Imagine townsfolk parading through muddy streets, their spoon hats clinking and sparkling under a cloudy sky. The librarian shares a quirky tidbit. In some places, if a man accidentally broke his spoon hat, it was considered bad luck, so much so that he might have to perform a small ritual involving the village baker and a bowl of porridge to reverse the curse. You laugh, picturing a medieval version of a spoon apology ceremony. Later, you learn about the materials used in spoon hat making: wood, pewter, horn, even ivory for the wealthier classes. Each material brought its own meaning and status, turning the spoon hat into a wearable social map. But despite the differences, everyone shared a love for the spoon's simple, curving shape and its everyday magic. You leave the library feeling enriched and strangely connected to a past that seems less distant than you thought. That spoon hat you wear isn't just a quirky accessory, it's a bridge to stories, lives, and traditions that have been whispered through centuries. And somehow, that makes it all the more precious. You wake to the gentle creak of your wooden floorboards and the muted calls of roosters greeting the morning. The spoon hat waits patiently on your bedside table, glinting faintly in the early light. Today, you feel a pull to explore the darker corners of spoon history, the superstitions, the myths, and the whispered fears. As you wander toward the village square, you pass a small chapel where an old priest blesses villagers as they come and go. His words are low and steady, and you overhear him mention spoons. Strange, since spoons aren't exactly part of the usual holy paraphernalia. He tells a story. In some villages, spoons were believed to ward off evil spirits. Hanging spoons on hats or doors could keep the shadows at bay. You pause, considering the image of a medieval soul, tiptoeing through a dark forest, armed with nothing but a spoon hat against unseen demons. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were widespread or isolated to small pockets, but the idea that spoons served as protective charms adds a fascinating twist. You imagine spoons not just as tools or fashion, but as talismans, objects imbued with unseen power. Walking on, you notice a group of children gathered around an old woman weaving baskets. She tells them a story of the spoon witch, a figure said to appear during foggy nights, her hat bristling with spoons that could cast curses or blessings. The children listen wide-eyed, clutching their own small spoons tightly. You smile, remembering how myths often grow from kernels of truth, twisting and turning over time. It's a dance of human imagination, a way to make sense of the unknown. The spoon witch might have been a misunderstood healer or a rebellious woman shunned by society. Later, at the market, a man selling charms claims that wearing a spoon hat can bring good fortune in love and business. You raise an eyebrow but take the claim with a grain of medieval salt. On your way back, the sky darkens with rolling clouds, and a sudden breeze sends a clatter through the trees. Your spoon hat jingles softly, a comforting sound amid the gathering shadows. You think about how humans have always sought protection, be it through weapons, prayers, or simple spoons tied to hats. The humble spoon, so often overlooked, emerges as a symbol of hope, safety, and even defiance against the unpredictable world. And as the first raindrops fall, you tuck your hat firmly on your head, ready to face whatever mysteries the day, and night, might bring. The afternoon sun warms your shoulders as you stroll toward the village green, where preparations are underway for a curious event, the annual spoon hat contest. The air is alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of countless spoons. Children dart between adults, each proudly sporting their own version of the famous spoon hat, from simple single-spoon adornments to extravagant constructions that seem to defy gravity. You find a comfortable spot beneath a blossoming chestnut tree and watch the parade of competitors. There's a local tailor whose hat features spoons arranged like a shimmering fan, catching the sunlight and sending scattered reflections across the grass. Nearby, an elderly woman's hat is woven with wooden spoons carved with intricate patterns, each one telling a story of family, tradition, or a memorable feast. The judges, a panel of village elders, inspect each entry carefully, discussing the creativity, craftsmanship, and, of course, the jingling symphony each hat produces when its wearer moves. There's a light-hearted tension, with friendly bets and whispered alliances among the crowd. You overhear an intriguing detail: some spoons used in the contest are heirlooms, passed down through generations. They carry a sort of silent memory, the weight of countless meals shared, conversations held, and moments celebrated. The spoon hat becomes not just a quirky fashion statement but a living archive of personal and communal history. Historians still argue whether these contests are direct descendants of medieval traditions or more recent inventions inspired by romanticized ideas of the past. Either way, they serve as joyful reminders of how the spoon's story continues to evolve and enchant. As the contest winds down, a sudden gust of wind sends a flurry of spoons rattling, and the crowd bursts into laughter. A young boy's hat collapses under the weight of its own spoons, and he grins sheepishly, fixing it with quick, practiced hands. The mood is warm and communal, everyone sharing in the delight of this odd but beloved custom. You feel a comforting sense of belonging, imagining yourself part of this ongoing, spoon-spangled tradition. The spoon hat, once a strange curiosity, now seems like a beacon of joy, connection, and creative spirit. And as the sun dips low, casting long shadows, you realize that sometimes, the oddest stories make the best companions for a good night's sleep. The evening settles like a soft blanket, and the village takes on a gentle glow under lantern light. You find yourself back at the tavern, where the scent of roasted meat and spiced ale fills the air. The chatter is lively but hushed in corners, as stories swirl around tables like smoke. You join a small group gathered near the fire, all wearing various spoon hats, each telling a unique tale. One grizzled traveler boasts of spoons crafted from rare metals, gifted by distant kings. He tells of spoon hats used to signal allegiance during secret meetings, where the position of spoons conveyed messages only understood by insiders. You listen, captivated, as he spins a yarn that blurs the line between fact and folklore. Across the table, a young woman speaks softly about the emotional power of spoons. Her family's spoon hat was lost during a raid decades ago, and with it, the tangible link to her ancestors. She keeps a single spoon as a keepsake, a small anchor to her past. Her story resonates deeply. You realize how these simple objects carry not just utility but profound meaning. Historians still argue whether spoon hats were mainly a practical fashion or a form of coded communication within medieval societies. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. A minstrel begins to play a gentle tune, and the group's mood shifts to something quieter, more reflective. The spoons hanging from hats catch the flickering light, creating a soft, tinkling melody that feels both ancient and alive. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the countless others who have worn these spoon hats through centuries, farmers, nobles, children, witches, and rebels, all connected by this curious thread. The night deepens, and you feel the steady pull of sleep. The spoon hat, once a whimsical accessory, now feels like a warm companion, a symbol of resilience, identity, and shared humanity. You lean back, letting the gentle clinking lull you toward rest, grateful for the strange, wonderful journey you've shared. The world outside your window has softened into a quiet hush. The sky is a deep navy, sprinkled with stars that seem to blink with knowing amusement. Your spoon hat rests gently on your lap, its spoons catching faint moonlight, casting playful shadows on the walls. Tonight feels like a perfect moment to reflect on the strange and wonderful journey you've taken through this curious corner of history. You think back to the earliest days, when spoons were more than just utensils, they were symbols, tokens, even talismans. How something so ordinary could become extraordinary when worn perched atop a hat, jingling with every step, is a beautiful reminder of human creativity and the endless ways we seek to express ourselves. Throughout your travels, you've encountered peasants, nobles, jesters, and witches, all bound together by a shared fascination with spoons. Some wore them as badges of status, others as protection, and many simply for the joy of standing out. Historians still debate the exact reasons behind this whimsical trend, but the stories you've heard, the festivals, the rituals, the myths, paint a vivid picture of a society that found meaning in the smallest of things. You smile, remembering the market's laughter, the chapel's whispered superstitions, the contests of clinking hats, and the quiet moments by the fire. Every spoon had a story, every had a personality. This isn't just medieval oddity, it's a lesson about identity, community, and the timeless desire to connect. As your eyelids grow heavy, the sounds of the village fade into a soft murmur. The spoon hat's gentle clink becomes a lullaby, wrapping you in a comforting rhythm. You realize that in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, these small, peculiar traditions offer a soothing anchor. So, as you drift towards sleep, remember this: even the oddest customs have a way of telling us who we are, where we come from, and what we cherish. Good night, and may your dreams be as curious and enchanting as the spoon hats of long ago. Wind down. The night wraps around you like a soft quilt, calming every restless thought. Your breathing slows, syncing with the quiet pulse of the world outside. The spoon hats, the stories, the laughter, they all settle gently into the background of your mind, like a whispered secret just for you. There's no rush here, no urgency, just the slow unfolding of calm and peace. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a gentle stream, carrying you away from the day's noise into a place of rest. The spoon's soft clinking fades, replaced by a tender silence that cradles you close. Sleep comes softly, tender and sure, a quiet journey toward morning's light. Sweet dreams.